AV Shop Talk, Episode 14.
Podcasting from Boston, Massachusetts and Los Angeles, California, this is AV Shop Talk. Covering the latest audiovisual trends and emerging technologies, this is where the AV pros come to talk shop. With your hosts, Nate Schneider and Jason Griffin.
Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of AV Shop Talk. So happy to be with you. Jason Griffin here, joined as usual by my partner in crime, Nate. Nate, how are you?
I'm doing well tonight. It is a pleasure to be joining you this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another exciting episode that I'm really looking forward to sharing with our audience. We had Mark Ullrich on from Symetrix and just kind of dived into the world of DSPs and really I learned a lot. Learned a lot from the conversation, but before we jump into that, Nate, I just got to ask: have you filled out your NCAA bracket yet?
Oh, that's a very good question. I got that. I'm gonna click over right now. I got the bracket filled out. I can't say that I'm an expert, but I do have Kentucky winning it. I think Kentucky's gonna take it.
Certainly, I think a pretty safe. Well, nothing's a safe bet, I guess, in the NCAA tournament, but definitely, I think some of the smart money's on Kentucky. I really enjoy the NCAA tournament. I always have fun filling out a bracket. Actually, last year I didn't do it and really regretted it. So we're doing one at the office this year, and I still have to fill mine out and don't have a lot of time. I think we're sitting here recording this, and I believe actually the tournament, if I remember correctly, starts tomorrow. So I should probably jump on that.
Yeah, you better get on that over there. Now, interesting point while we're talking about the bracket and how this ties back into audio-video technology is that in 2012, I remember paying $5 and I could stream any of the games live or on demand. No cable information at all. And then the next year, it was like their trial balloon. They were testing out the streaming thing. And then the very next year, you had to type in your cable service provider's username and password in order to get that same service. So I thought that was very interesting because I'm a cord cutter. So I thought that, I had it made. I don't have to go through a cable company. I can just pay $5, watch the tournament, boom, every single game. That's awesome. But then the big cable companies, they caught wind of what was happening. They said, We want our piece of the pie. You gotta log in through us, or else you don't get to watch it. So now
interesting. Well, we're seeing actually things trending back in the cord cutters direction right now. Really, with the Apple event was recently, and with the big HBO Now news and the ability now to stream all of HBO's content for $15 a month without having a cable bill is definitely, I think, a step in the right direction. And certainly kind of getting off on a tangent here, but yeah, I'd be curious to see. I think live sports are one of those things that the cable providers are really, latching onto. There's a lot of value in that. It really drives viewership, and it's not something that people are as inclined to DVR and blast through the commercials. So I think there's a little bit more value in it for the cable providers, and I think that's kind of one of the reasons why they're latching onto it. But speaking of live sports, I'd be willing to bet that a lot of these venues where the March Madness tournament is going to be going on are probably have audio systems that are driven by Symetrix. And we'll tie that back to our guest here, Mark Ullrich, and he is the international sales manager for Symetrix, and a lot on his plate. We really appreciated him, taking the time to come on the show. And as a residential guy, I have to say that I don't work with DSPs a lot, and I just found the conversation to be really interesting to learn, just about everything that goes into that world and some of the applications and real world use cases that these guys are out there putting products into. I thought was really interesting.
Well, and one of the things we mentioned was the Sports Hub in Singapore, which is like a massive undertaking from an audio networking standpoint. So that definitely ties in, although there's no March Madness games being played over in Singapore to my knowledge. Definitely still a relevant topic of discussion. So without any further ado, why don't we jump on into the interview?
AV Shop Talk.
Welcome to the AV Shop Talk podcast. Jason and I are happy to introduce to our listeners Mark Ullrich of Symetrix, and he is the International Sales Manager. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the AV Shop Talk podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we are going to talk about audio DSPs tonight, and we're going to get what we really want to do here with the podcast is kind of dive into what's the big value add to some of these new DSP technologies out there, because the landscape certainly isn't the same as it was, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago even. Things are rapidly changing. So this is a great opportunity for Jason and I to kind of hear what Symetrix has to offer in the world of audio DSPs. So before we get into that, you are the International Sales Manager at Symetrix. Can you give our listeners a brief description of what your day-to-day responsibilities are and maybe how long you've been at Symetrix?
Sure. Well, gosh, as International Sales Manager, I guess a lot of my days begin waking up and trying to figure out what country I'm in. And luckily, I can generally narrow it down to at least the continent pretty quickly. But my job essentially has three main components to it. I'd say the first and probably the most important is just distribution management. Symetrix works with about 75 independent partners throughout the world. And a big part of my job is just growing and nurturing strong relationships with those partners, making sure they've got the resources they need, making sure everybody is trained up, and just so that they can be as successful with the brand as possible. I have one product line that I worry about. They have anywhere from 5 to maybe 20 different product lines. So I try to bring as much value to the partners as I can, just in making it easy for them to get up and running with Symetrix and be successful with the brand. So that's kind of the first component. That's kind of so I like to think the farming component of it. And then there's like the business development side, which is maybe more of the hunting component. So that would, of course, involve looking for new opportunities, looking for new strategic partnerships. Looking for new markets that maybe we haven't cracked, or emerging markets that are just kind of coming onto the world stage. And then lastly, I think the final component is some technical sales engineering in there as well. And that could be just sales training, that could be technical trainings, that could be pre and post sales support. But there's always kind of that technical component to it in our industry. But so it sounds like you've got three things you outlined there. You've got the main product line that you represent, business development, and then technical support, supporting customers, integrators, maybe even clients that are looking to maybe troubleshoot or figure out the best option for their specific needs. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Sounds like I got like a 50,000 foot view of kind of what you do. Now, where are you guys headquartered? I assume you're out on the West Coast. Are you guys in Seattle?
Yeah, we're in Seattle. We're just north of Seattle. And gosh, there's a huge cachet of audio professionals, as I always joke. We've got so many audio, we've got from Symetrix to Rain to Behringer, Loud Technologies, which of course is Mackie, Martin, EAW, and everybody else. And I always joke that, in the 90s, we had 1,000 bands who were all hoping to be the next Pearl Jam. And when they didn't become the next Pearl Jam, they all went to get real jobs at audio companies or start audio companies. But we've just got this fantastic group of people in the Seattle area, and Symetrix is no exception.
Yeah, that's kind of, when I first got into the industry, that's kind of what I heard from some of the seasoned veterans, is they said that, a lot of people were, roadies or monitor technicians or front of house technicians or musicians, and they were done touring and they cut off their ponytails and they got a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And that's what they wound up doing. Okay, so now before you got into the world of audio DSP, I got to touch on this. I know you've got a Pro Tools rig because you're going to be recording some really high quality audio for us on your end, which is awesome for the podcast. Now, what were you up to before you got into the world of DSP? Were you a musician, or what type of work did you do?
Yeah, I've always been a musician, so that's definitely one of the reasons I gravitated towards audio. By trade, I was on track to become a commercial airline pilot, of all things,
Wow.
before switching, my studies over to music and audio. I'm sure my parents were really happy, that day when I hung up the wings and joined choir and started messing around with synthesizers. But that's really where my digital audio career began. I had a really progressive professor in college who introduced me to a programming language called Super Collider. And this was basically a computer programming language for real-time audio synthesis. And so that was, during those real formative college years, and really got into the stuff. It's sort of a language that combines object-oriented programming, like you'd find in Smalltalk, with kind of the syntax of C++, not to get too geeky, but it was really low-level stuff as far as music and audio goes, and that's kind of what brought me into that digital audio realm. And then out of school, I worked in recording engineering for a few years, but really when Symetrix came along, that was my first real job, quote unquote.
Very cool. So, and did you say how long have you been at Symetrix now?
I've been at Symetrix just over 10 years.
Very cool. So definitely a similar trajectory, I think, to a lot of our listeners and integrators in general. I know myself also followed kind of a similar path in terms of coming out of school with sort of aspirations of working in recording, and kind of dabbled with it a little bit, but for various reasons just sort of switched gears, right? And here we are. So, I think your job sounds very interesting, actually, and I am curious to know, if there's somebody out there who's listening who maybe is just starting to consider maybe getting into the world of pro AV or maybe professional systems integration. Do you have any advice, Mark, that you might give somebody who would be interested in maybe working for Symetrix or a company like Symetrix?
Yeah, the advice I always give is really simple. Pick an industry and or a company that you really feel gravitated towards, something that feels like home. And really take the first job somebody will give you. I know that sounds crazy. You need the necessary prereqs, of course, if it involves something technical. But for me personally, I, for whatever reason, was really gravitated towards commercial audio. And when Symetrix came along, I took a job just in inside sales. So certainly nothing glamorous, but it was the beginning of my career. And I didn't set out to be doing inside sales, more administrative work my whole life, but it really put me on track to get to the role that I'm in today, which I very much love. So, I think if I had any advice, I would just say, find a company that you're interested in, find especially the industry you're interested in, and just really take the first job someone will give you, because once you get in the door, you will naturally gravitate and find the resources and the people to help you get to that place that you ultimately want to be.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think, you could probably say this about a lot of different industries, but especially in the world of systems integration, pro AV, and these sort of technical fields, you can learn as much as you want in school, but really when it comes down to it, once you get out in the field, there's always just a lot of on-the-job training, and it really comes down to kind of getting with a company that you feel like is a good personal fit for you, and then just sort of learning and getting in, get in where you fit in. And I think that's great advice. Let's jump into kind of Symetrix as a company. We've got a little personal history of you now, but maybe you can give us an overview of Symetrix and how the company got started.
Yeah, absolutely. Company goes all the way back to 1976. And speaking of having a background in music, passion, music, and audio, Dane Butcher, our founder and president, was doing session work in San Francisco and working in audio, working in music. He was, in fact, the tracking engineer on, I believe, the greatest selling jazz fusion album of all time, which is Herbie Hancock's Headhunters. And so he had a good set of ears on him. And so he started tinkering around with actual audio, component design. And this was kind of the time period, late 70s, when things started to modularize a little bit. Back in the day, everything was really stuffed into a big board. And the components started to be modularized in that, channel strips started to evolve. And in fact, our 528 channel strip, I believe, was the first channel strip as a standalone processor outside of a mixing board. And so he saw a need there and started tinkering, I'm sure, in a garage or a kitchen, and eventually incorporated Symetrix. That was in 1976, and obviously the company's evolved a lot since then. But those were the origins.
That's pretty amazing too. I don't know if I should assume that everybody knows who Herbie Hancock is, but that is pretty remarkable that he happened to be the engineer in the room setting up microphones and tracking, for that album. Because that's, I don't know, for me, it's definitely up there with, Miles Davis, Kinda Blue, Abbey Road by the Beatles, Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. Like it's one of those albums, Headhunters, that you kind of, that's part of the conversation of like one of the better albums of like the century, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, just being in the room when that was going down. I mean, geez, what a piece of history that is.
It'd be interesting to know if he remembers what microphones he used during those tracking days back then. So that's pretty cool. But so no, that's again, roots in music is kind of a theme in the systems integration industry, and I don't know of any integration house that doesn't have like a company band, right? It's like everybody just kind of comes from that world, and that's a very cool story. Now, when we think of like Symetrix, I got to tell you, the first time I can remember seeing the name Symetrix on a piece of gear was probably about 10 years ago, and it was on an analog EQ, and it was called, and I can tell you the model number. It was the 532E series.
Sure.
And I even dug up the old manual because I happen to have the manual right here in my office, and I'll tweet a little picture of that on the AV Shop Top account so you can see what I'm talking about here. But that was a graphic EQ maybe 10 years ago. I got to imagine that the industry has changed. And can you give us kind of a big picture, like what type of products does Symetrix aim to manufacture today? And do you still manufacture those same types of EQs from? I think it was a graphic EQ.
Yeah, well, the company has definitely evolved quite a bit, even from those days, and that wasn't too long ago. But big picture, Symetrix designs, we manufacture, and we sell DSPs, digital signal processors, and these processors are used in managing audio in a really broad range of commercial applications. And this could include public address systems, sound reinforcement, automatic mic mixing, teleconferencing, background music, and just about anything under the sun involving audio. And so more specifically, that is comprised of platforms, software platforms, hardware, and control that system integrators use, as I always say, kind of like Legos, and you put these together to accomplish the task at hand and build the best solution you can. And so there's a whole range of products within the software, hardware, and control systems, all the way from just very simple 4 input, 4 output, up to very sophisticated, scalable systems that you can use to build a football stadium. Yeah,
so you're talking from a conference room all the way up to a football stadium. When you're talking about scalable, that's kind of what you're talking about here. Anywhere from 8 channels or 12 in and 8 out to what's the max? Like, what's the roof? Is there a hard limit of? And I know we're probably got to mention product lines at this point because it might be different. But like, what is the maximum number of inputs and outputs that like all the bells and whistles Symetrix system could handle? Is it infinite, or is there a limit?
Yeah, there's no hard limit. The largest Symetrix installation done to date was just recently completed in Singapore. It's what's called the Sports Hub Complex. It's this enormous project, and it's a stadium. There's an aquatic center. There's a track and field arena, and there were approximately 92 of our processors put into this system and networked together. And we can get into more detail on that if you'd like. But, these processors can have up to 16 channels each. So 16 times 92, not a mathematician, but whatever that is, that's one example of a very large system. But again, there's no theoretical limit. It's all in the way that you design the system. It's in the way that you set up the network. And kind of the sky is the limit with these types of processors.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I would like to dive deep, maybe more into the technical stuff just for a minute here. So we can talk about Dante, and Jason and I have been trying to keep up with the new and developing networked audio technologies that are out there. We've talked to Greg Schlechter of the Avenue Alliance. He's been on a previous episode. And, we've discussed AVB. And it seems like there's a lot of buzz recently more around this layer 3 communication. I don't know if that's something that you could talk on at all. But, like, from my understanding, and I don't do DSP programming as my day-to-day, but as a system designer, I have to be aware of it and keep up with it. I know CobraNet was kind of limited to layer 2, and then there's all this buzz around, when you talk about the OSI model, and being able to, hop across multiple nodes or routers, on the layer 3 level. Is this something that Dante can handle? Does Dante currently support like layer 3 audio networking? Or maybe the first question is that really important to, the systems that you've seen and trends in the industry?
Yeah, great question. There's really a million and one reasons why Dante is very quickly becoming adopted by the industry in terms of interoperability. And one of the big reasons for that is, in fact, what we call layer 3. And for those of us who don't know, layer 3 is really just a set of internet protocol standards. IP is in IP address. And so maybe for larger context, layer 1 is what is described as the physical layer. And so this is very basic communication, simply meaning, from one node on the network to another over fiber or copper. So just electrical signals basically being traded from one device to another. We move up to layer 2, which is called the data link layer. And this is where CobraNet came in. And this is obviously much more sophisticated than layer 1, but now it's looking more outdated. It's more just between devices, and the communication is based on the MAC address. When we jump into layer 3, this is where true internet protocol, again IP, comes in. And essentially this gives system integrators the ability to deploy audio on everyday standard networks. So what this really means is that the networks in your home or in your office that support our computer traffic, our email, VoIP phone systems, everything that we use in our everyday life on these networks is now available to support audio thanks to Dante. And this is full resolution, uncompressed audio, I should add. So layer 3 is a big revolution for audio over Ethernet.
Now, a quick question about Dante that I just want to make sure is a point that everybody is clear on. Dante, as if I understand it correctly, works on basically standard network gear. Basically, any Ethernet network switch you go out and buy theoretically at the store would be able to route Dante. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. To that point, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but to that point, I wanted to make sure I was clear on that, because as I understand it, it's kind of a hot topic in the industry right now with networked audio, and you have people kind of comparing and contrasting Dante versus AVB. I know you guys probably at some point had to sit down in a conference room or something and make a kind of a hard decision, right, of which path you were going to go. And maybe you can talk about Symetrix's decision to kind of go full steam ahead with Dante versus a technology like AVB.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of foresight on behalf of Dane, our president, and our product development team. And I wasn't in the room when those decisions were made, but I know Symetrix, as I'm sure many other audio companies at the time, were having that discussion. And you kind of think back to the VHS versus Betamax days. Which format is going to be the one that the industry adopts? So I don't know exactly what the decisions were to lead us to Dante, but I can assume that when you've got a company like Audinate behind this technology, you have dedicated resources, things tend to get done in a more uniform manner, a more consistent manner, and it makes it easy for manufacturers like Symetrix to simply license this technology. So when we're communicating between two Symetrix boxes, or we're communicating from Symetrix to, say, an Audio-Technica microphone or a Yamaha board, we're really communicating Dante to Dante. That's guaranteed because Audinate develop this technology, and all they have to do is be able to talk to themselves. As long as we can get to the Dante card, and the third party, say the Yamaha board, as long as they can get out to the Dante card, from there the communication is really guaranteed, and it makes it much easier for the industry to adopt the technology because it's basically ready to go. And so I think that is one of the advantages that Dante has over an open source set of standards like AVB, where you have these little islands of development teams putting AVB together. But at least as far as where things are at now, you kind of have a 2 or 3, 4 different AVB islands that aren't necessarily interoperable with each other yet. So I think that's really where we've seen the industry adopt Dante much more quickly.
Yeah, and AVB also requires the use of basically network devices that are AVB compliant. So you do have some specialization, I guess, in the network hardware, right? That you would have to account for if you were going to go with a full AVB system.
That's correct. Special switches, special dedicated AVB switches are required. They're still a little bit rare. They're still a little bit expensive. And that's essentially because the switches are little computers, meaning that they are involved in the clocking process. And so they do have to be more sophisticated, and thus they're a little more rare, a little more expensive than just your standard off-the-shelf switches that Dante can run on, which has been a big advantage for Dante.
Right.
Yeah, the whole time-sensitive networking thing is the other, TSN is kind of like the new buzzword. Getting those packets to be in sync, that's been the challenge, right? To try to bring that synchronization to an Ethernet platform. I do think that AVB, it seems like it's off to a slow start. Like they are pushing out switches and endpoints or microphones and a few different products here and there. I think it has a lot of potential over the long haul, but definitely right now, if you want to look for a networked audio solution, Dante seems to be the product to reach for. You mentioned, I think something like 92 processors were networked together at this Sports Hub Singapore. Do you know if that was all on a dedicated audio network, or is that on just the how should I say this? The traditional backbone where all the other networked traffic is also plugged into?
Yeah, with a system this big, they were correct in moving it to a dedicated network. Though one of the advantages with Dante is that audio data can coexist with other data that you've got on the network, whether it's voice over IP or just internet traffic or any number of other types of traffic you can have coexist on that system with the audio. With a system this big, where things are pretty mission critical, they put it onto a dedicated network, but that's something that the system integrator can certainly decide for themselves what's best.
I have just one more question about networked audio, and then we can move into talking about some of Symetrix specific installations and products. As somebody who lives and breathes this stuff, I'm curious to hear your opinion on whether or not is Dante or AVB a one or the other type of choice. I mean, maybe it is right now, and assuming it is right now, will it always be? Or are these two technologies at some point going to, in some way converge and kind of bring the benefits of both maybe into one piece of hardware? Is that even possible?
Gosh, great question. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think what we'll see in the near term is perhaps a bridge via AES 67, I want to say it is. And I don't know too much about it. I'm no expert, but it kind of comes down to the Ethernet hardware that the system integrator wants to use. And it's easy and generally the best to keep everything on the same network if you can, unless you're deploying a Dante network into something that has a legacy AVB system. But even that, they're both so new that I doubt you'd have a scenario like that. I don't think you're going to see scenarios where system integrators are going to want to start putting two different types of clouds together in the same installation. So my feeling is that it's going to gravitate towards one or the other. There are some advantages in the underlying technology with AVB in terms of things, again, not to get too geeky, but resource reservation and synchronization of the switches. But with a gigabit backbone and with latency that is not perceptible, with 0.25 milliseconds latency on a standard Dante network, those are kind of moot points. And so I think system integrators are really just looking for the easiest and most reliable system to deploy. And I think we're seeing that behind the reasons everybody is going with Dante these days. So it'll be interesting to see how the technology evolves from here. But for the time being, I think there's a clear winner. And I should also add a lot of other value propositions that come along with Dante, just in terms of the virtual sound card, for example, which is being able to send audio directly to and from just the LAN port on your computer, some of the redundancy options for fail-safe operation, and really just being able to manage it on a network like we manage everything else. So that's certainly the trend. Again, I don't know where it'll go in the future, but if I had to look into my crystal ball, that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for sharing that perspective. And, we should jump into SymNet Composer. I know I think it was, let me pull up the press release here, December 17th. Was that when SymNet Composer 3.0 was officially released?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, 3.0 brought about some really nice new features. We released a new piece of hardware. It's called the Radius 12x8 EX, and this is an update to the original Radius 12x8. Just for some background there, this is an open architecture DSP, 12 input, 8 output, and adds a 4-channel card slot. So now you can purpose the box for various applications. For example, you could add a telephone hybrid card or a VoIP card. You could add an acoustic echo cancellation card, for example. So it's a really nimble form factor. And so we think we're going to hit a sweet spot with that Radius 12x8 EX. Also coming along with the 3.0 release, we had the voice over IP card. This is a 2-line card. A really nice component for the next generation hardware, which is the Radius and the Edge. This will help bring us further into the teleconferencing realm. And then a couple third-party integrations. A year ago or so, we integrated Aterotech and Stewart Audio into the design software that's used for our processors. And this got some really nice traction, some really nice feedback, and attracted the likes of Audio-Technica and Shure. And so with the 3.0 release, we've got integration of their Dante products directly in our design software. So as you're putting your system together, you can drop our hardware on screen right alongside the any Audio-Technica products or Shure products, and the aforementioned Aterotech and Stewart Audio to really make that Dante integration as seamless as possible for the designer.
Now, to me, this seems like that's kind of a big deal for integrators, or a big value add, is being able to have this, SymNet Composer 3.0 and be able to, do the DSP programming in that one location, but then be able to communicate to, I guess maybe I don't want to use the term vendor neutral, because that's going a little too far, but it plays nicely with other manufacturers, which seems like there could be a lot of potential there. That seems like the big takeaway here from my perspective. Is that the sense that you're getting? Is that what you mean when you like, I go to the website and I see the terms open architecture, Dante scalable? Is that referring to playing nicely with other manufacturers, or is that is that kind of what the lingo is speaking of?
Yeah, it's not only playing nicely with other manufacturers, but it's the whole design process itself. So as far as the design process, open architecture, just to define it for those who don't know, is kind of like the AutoCAD of audio. Anybody familiar with AutoCAD, you have a blank canvas, you have a list of modules, you drop these modules on screen, you arrange them, and you can really create the system that you desire with very little limitations. In the old days, you'd have to get a compressor, and then you'd wire it up to an EQ, and then you'd wire that up to a downward expander or whatever you needed. And with open architecture now, those processes, those modules have all been virtualized. For example, in the SymNet Composer software, where we do all the programming for the open architecture, we have some 400 or 500 different modules to choose from. So the designer can go in there and really create the system that they need to very exacting degree. So then Dante adds another layer on top of that. Once you've got this system architecture designed, then Dante allows you to scale it. You can scale it out to additional Symetrix hardware, for example. Maybe you're adding more inputs, more outputs. Maybe you're just simply adding more DSP horsepower. But then, of course, Dante being interoperable with many, many other manufacturers in the industry, I think there's 200 now, I want to say, that gives you extreme power in, yes, like you said, kind of being more agnostic as far as who you're integrating with, because everything now is kind of on a level playing field with Dante. And now we can go out to the Audio-Technica microphones, we can go out to the Yamaha board, and everything just over Cat 5 or Cat 6, and have hundreds of channels swirling around the network. So that scalability in terms of Dante and that open architecture as far as the design process goes really makes things powerful.
And then just want to make sure also that I'm understanding one thing correctly. Coming from the residential side, I don't do a lot of work with DSPs, and reading about SymNet 3.0, basically what I'm kind of taking away from it is that one of the real kind of selling points in terms of if I'm an integrator looking to possibly work with this software versus maybe one of your competitors, is that now I'm able to, like you referred to the Audio-Technica, I think it's a boundary mic that you guys have announced that you're integrated with. Basically, I can set that all up within the SymNet Composer, whereas before, was there a separate program that I would have to go into to configure that device? Am I understanding that correctly?
Right. So with any Dante network, you get visibility onto that network in a couple different ways. The overall visibility is attained through using the Dante controller software. And essentially, this is just a really big matrix, and it shows all of your input devices, all of your output devices, and then you can do basic routing and diagnostics and some other things within that software. Symetrix was one of the first companies to bring those types of processes into our configuration software, so that system integrators don't even have to necessarily use the Dante controller software. So as they're putting the system together, they can drop a Radius 12x8 EX on screen, maybe one of our 12 input expanders that expands the system via Dante. Then they drag in an Audio-Technica microphone as well. When they do that, the Dante connections are essentially automatic, and there's nothing else the integrator has to do from there. So kind of in the background, just by being all in the same design screen within the same design software, those interconnects via Dante are automatic.
Now, I have a question at the risk of it might be a dumb question, because I don't do DSP audio DSP programming in my day-to-day. But I do a lot of AutoCAD work. I do a lot of parts lists and cable pulls. So forgive me if this is a dumb question, but as I understand it, you'd have this code, right? And you'd do this programming, and you'd use this open architecture drag and drop, where you'd bring in these modules and you'd connect the dots and get your whole signal flow nice and ready to go. What would be the next step? When you've got, like, for example, 92 of these processors, how do you load the code onto each and every single one of those? Or maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way, because I guess what I'm familiar with is maybe a fixed architecture where you load a set of code onto a specific box, and then you do a few things and turn it on, and boom, there you go. How does the logistics of the programming work? And I admit I'm a newbie when it comes to audio DSP programming. I don't do this all the time, but Can you answer that question?
Yeah, you know the great thing with where the technology at with Symetrix, everything is network based. So whether you've got 2 units, whether you've got 92 units, each unit simply has an IP address. You put it on the network. The network says, "Hey, do you want an IP address?" The unit, depending on whether you have it set for static IP or a DHCP, says, "Sure, give me an IP address," or "Thank you, I've already got one." At that point, everything is flat. And so you have a single connection from your computer out to this same network. Once you've got the programming, you know, you've got the architecture, all the modules connected, and you're happy with the design, the computer simply pushes this code to the units. And again, everything just sits on the exact same network, whether they're daisy chained together or whether they're centralized or decentralized as far as the network topology goes. Every unit is just simply a network node with an IP address, and when the programming is done, it's just a push of the button, and that code goes out to all the hardware to update them with that particular programming.
Okay, so you got your laptop on the same network as on your private audio network, for example, and you hook up to it, and that's going to pick up or somehow auto sense the different boxes that are compatible that are on that network, and it's going to maybe give you a list of the different devices there?
That's right. It's a visual discovery process. So if you've got your computer on that same network as all the units and your IP addressing is consistent, you have a window. It just shows a list of all the units that are available that have been discovered on that network. You select the units you want to work with. You can flash the LEDs on the front of the unit to make sure you're communicating physically with the right one. And from there, you push the code and you're off to the races.
Okay, great. I'm sure there's a lot of programmers out there laughing at me right now, but I just had to ask.
All right, Mark. Well, hey, we want to respect your time. We're kind of running up against our time here, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Definitely learned a lot. I think it's a fascinating world. I'm just sitting here, you know, picturing how far down the rabbit hole you could really go with DSP programming, and I'm sure there's a whole world to it and a whole culture of guys out there who are just amazing with this stuff. And I know that Symetrix really has a reputation for being up there with the top dogs in that industry and putting out quality hardware, and you guys have been around for a while, and we really appreciate the opportunity to have you on the show to discuss it. So maybe we can kind of wrap up with you sharing with our audience kind of what's getting you guys excited at Symetrix these days. What do you guys got cooking?
Gosh, well, our engineering team is really eating their Wheaties. We just, as we talked about, released 3.0. There's already talk about 4.0 and 4.1. I wish I could go into detail, but there are some really exciting products coming with those releases soon. So stay tuned for those. And we're just really looking forward to, again, continuing to make the core technologies within Symetrix as accessible and as interoperable in the industry as possible. There's this very mature, very rich code base with all of the DSP going on in our processors that we've been, honing in for probably 15 years now, and really just trying to make it as accessible to the industry via things like Dante and having the right endpoints and the right again Legos, as I always like to call them, to make everything as easy to integrate as possible is what we're always working to do. It's a fantastic team to be with, and it's been a pleasure to be able to share it with you guys here tonight.
Very cool. Yeah, we appreciate it. If there's anybody listening to the show who might want to maybe get in contact with you directly or learn a little bit more about the company, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, the best way, of course, is just the website, which is symetrix.co. A lot of fantastic resources there, and we always love to hear from you. People can reach out and contact us at sales@symetrix.co. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. We look forward to hearing more from Symetrix, and thank you for taking the time to talk shop with us about audio DSPs.
All right, Nate, Jason, thanks a lot.
All right, well, that concludes our interview with Mark Ullrich. Nate, what'd you think?
Yeah, no, I had a great time chatting with him. It was really cool to get into the music stuff. I'm always fascinated at the people that get into commercial integration or in this case DSP manufacturing. They come from a world of music, especially the Seattle area with all those bands out there.
Yeah, I think that's really common in our industry. I know you and I both share that background and that love for recording technology, and Symetrix really has deep roots in that industry. In fact, one of the first times that I had ever heard of Symetrix, I know you had a similar experience, but I had an old Symetrix, I believe it was a 525 compressor back when I had a little recording setup. Okay. And it was kind of one of these compressors that everybody on the forums was raving about, and sort of a bang for your buck kind of deal. And that was my first experience with Symetrix, and little did I know at the time that they were, kind of a behemoth in the industry of DSP, and really have just learned a lot about them since.
Yeah, definitely made the transition from more of like the broadcasts, standard like rack mount outboard gear that you'd see in a studio or broadcast setup. Definitely have a lot to offer in the world of DSPs for commercial integrators, as far as that goes.
Yeah. So one last time, just want to thank Mark for coming on. Nate, we've got some exciting projects in the works. One that I wanted to tease for anyone still listening here is a conversation that near and dear to my heart as a home theater guy. And we're going to have Chris Boylan on. And I think the home theater geeks in our audience will be familiar with Chris. Runs a blog called Big Picture, Big Sound. Great resource for home theater information. And we're going to talk all about immersive 3D audio. And that's a very, very hot topic in my portion of the industry right now. And you've got competing technologies from Dolby with Atmos, a company called Oro out of Europe with Oro 3D, and DTS coming to the table actually now with DTSX. So a lot going on in that space, and I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah, I've definitely got a lot to learn when it comes to this type of stuff, and there's some new developments when it comes to surround sound technology. So that is what we are going to be diving deep into next time. Thank you for joining us. One more thing I wanted to mention. Don't forget an important date on your calendar. Dynamic Range Day is happening this year, March 27th of 2015. Now it's just a little movement for all you music enthusiasts out there, and all you guys that are maybe working in recording studios or in the broadcast world. That the whole idea of dynamic range has definitely been a hot topic. Just like the analog versus digital and all those debates that folks like us tend to have. The dynamic range thing. Do you squash the album and just make it as loud as possible, or do you actually appreciate the dynamic range? So this whole movement going on started by a producer, a mastering engineer, Ian Shepherd over in the UK. So I think it's a cool thing he's got going on. Wanted to give him a little shout out on our podcast. Thought you guys would appreciate that. But thank you for joining us, and we will talk shop with you in the next episode of AV Shop Talk. Shop Talk podcast is produced independently by Jason Griffin and myself, Nate Schneider. Musical contributions have been provided by Colin Owens. Voiceover contributions have been provided by John Perry. For more information, visit avshoptalk.com/episode 14.